So we're here to talk about careers in analytics, and I am the lucky one that gets to ask the questions to these ladies. My name is Elisa Knoll, and I just finished at Ohio State and also finished an internship with Drive Capital, which was awesome in analytics, and I'm starting with Boston Consulting Group in June. So now to go down the line, Dr. Stacia Edwards is the Dean of Columbus State's Delaware campus and Regional Learning Centers. She got her PhD in higher education from the University of Pennsylvania, and she's had several other roles at different schools at Battelle and at the Ohio Board of Regents. Here we have Kristin Sobel. She's the Director of Enterprise Analytics at IGS Energy, and she's a Buckeye. She got her bachelor's in finance, and she started in IGS's rotational development program, where she went to financial forecasting and analytics and saw a need for the team that she now leads. She actually was one of the first people on that team. And finally, Jen Thiel is the Director of Analytics in Pharma at Cover My Meds. She's been there less than a year because she previously held several roles at Nationwide, and she studied computer science and literary criticism at Purdue before getting a master's in computer science at Franklin University. So we want this to be, as Katie Sasso mentioned with the previous panel, as conversational as possible, and we will leave time at the end for questions, but I will roll through some of the ones we have now. Everybody doesn't need to answer, we'll just pick and choose however you see fit. So to start us off, because most of you did not begin in analytics, how did you transition to an analytics role?
So what was really interesting to me is looking at being in a role that isn't an analytics role, but becoming an analytical person within that role. And I think that's what happened to me. So I was in an individual contributor role as an analyst in a department responsible for maintaining costs and maintaining a position, a power position. We reorged and saw the need for analytics, and we moved into that role. So once that department existed, we continued to grow and serve the rest of our department within the larger supply and risk group. From there, as Elisa mentioned, we saw the need for an enterprise analytics team. So from my perspective, I saw that as a person that owned a process, it was really difficult for me to get to the broader, more strategic analytics that we wanted to do. And so we proposed the idea of an enterprise analytics group that could look at that differently. And so then I moved into that role.
And I started in English, so I had an English background. And then they don't hire people with master's degrees in literary criticism. I don't know why. So then I pivoted to computer science, and they hire people with degrees in computer science. So I started working as a developer for several years. From there, I moved into testing, and from testing to test automation, which is all about the data. Once I started working with data, wow, this is really valuable and interesting stuff. And my kind of English degree creeped back in, like, how can I convince people to do things based on data, right? And then analytics is born, so I just kind of self-selected into the field.
Do you want to?
Sure, so I've been in higher education for my whole career. And at one point, we were really looking deeper into the labor market and trying to figure out what the needs were in the labor market, this whole skills gap, if you will. And so my connection to analytics actually started in that space, and then it just continued to grow. And any of those of you now who are in education know that we're spending a lot of energy and a lot of money trying to figure out the analytics around student success. So it just continues to grow.
Great, that's a great segue when you talk about success. So how does you and your team add value to your company? Because I know when I was first getting into analytics, I wasn't sure, are you really implementing all of the insights that you're finding? How do you make sure that you really are driving the success? So you could talk about how often you report to your higher ups, how often you've seen something implemented that you did.
So I always say to my team, success, in my opinion, is when a leader in an organization is making a decision and they want us in the room. They want us to be at that seat. So for me, I think answering questions and making sure that those answers are really actionable is the greatest way to show your success, because then the next time they're coming back to you. And that's the perspective that we take.
Right, I would agree with that. We have there's operational
analytics, right? So you're like internal decision support, where it's very clear, right? If you're teeing up a decision to make based on the data, if they make that decision, they feel comfortable with the data, right? That's kind of success. In my role at Government Meds and Pharma, we are very client-facing, and so a lot of our analytics is to help clients make decisions, which is interesting to me. At Nationwide, I was very much on the IT side and very kind of operational data, so I never had that kind of interaction with the client. And they're very vocal about about if you've met the mark, right? If you've given them enough information for them to make decisions.
Great. And just for the benefit of our audience, do you mind sharing some of the tools that you and your team use most often, or that you've seen most valid to be taught at school or for the future job prospects? Or in your case? Any of you can share.
We're heavily into SQL, so SQL skills. Excel is still a really valuable tool, right? But right, if you're a master of Excel, you can go a long way. We are working with Tableau a lot. At Government Meds, we also have Domo. It's very popular, and we're looking at bringing Alteryx in. I think the keynote this morning talked about Alteryx.
Great. Go ahead if you want.
Okay. So one of the roles I'm playing on the panel is kind of that bigger picture. And I have some colleagues that are looking at the nation and looking at all of the job ads right now related to data. So they did a search through Monster and Indeed, and they were just looking at the skills that emerged. And they put them into clusters. So nationally, you see, of course, business intelligence, and you're seeing different things in software and cloud computing. But then they looked at things regionally. And I think the most important thing for everyone to be thinking about as you're looking at your career is that where you work also matters with regards to the skills that will be required based on that industry mix. So looking at New York, it's different than what is in Washington, D.C., which is different than what we have here. So they actually did, this is, the group's called MC, and they did a little analysis, a big analysis of Columbus for me. And they said that we look similar, but yet very different, because actually in the space that they relate to business intelligence, we're doing much of our work in the cloud. And that's not, it doesn't look like that in other areas of the country. So I think it's really important to stay on top of that, more from the perspective of where you're thinking of working, and then also what type of industry that you want to work in.
And we're about to get into roles in a second, but when you do use those tools often, do you think that a person needs to have a certain level of mastery to come into your company, into one of your roles, or does it depend what level you're interested in? How have you hired people in the past? Do they need to be a SQL expert, or how does that work?
So I guess for us, it certainly depends on the exact role. And then from my perspective, it's more about aptitude. I think that the person with the appropriate aptitude can learn something pretty quickly. So I would rather have that than somebody that maybe isn't as good of a fit come in already having those skills.
I would agree. I think probably the higher level the position, the more the specific skills matter, because you're hiring them for those skills. You want those skills to kind of permeate, right? And you want them to be able to mentor others. But certainly at an entry level, and even at a mid-level, you're looking more for someone who is curious, right? Someone who, especially in the analytics field, can work with data to answer a question and then see what the result, what questions that begs, right? And then to follow those questions and to come back with kind of that whole journey, right? And someone who has a mind to do that is someone that I would be interested in.
Which is why those internships and that project-based learning is all really important, because it shows not only that you know how to use the tool, but then also that you have applied that tool.
So you spoke a little bit about you need someone with a little bit more expertise to lead the team. But I did just sit in on Laura's session where she talked about sometimes you hire people that are smarter than you for certain roles. How do you start to build your analytics team? Who do you need on it first? I guess Kristin, probably a good person to answer for that.
Yeah, so her presentation was awesome, and it really spoke to me because I am not a data scientist, and we have data scientists on our team, and I knew going in that I needed someone who could lead those people. And I'm constantly worried about development of those people because I know that I can't do that. So I think that understanding where you aren't strong and having a strong person to kind of fill that gap, and then even then always be considering their development even more than someone that maybe you feel like you're more equipped to develop.
So in your case, was that a really math-heavy person, a really programming-heavy person?
Both. So I'm lucky because he's kind of a unicorn and he is great at both and a good leader. And so for me, that was something that was really necessary to lead that team.
And did you guys have a chance to look at the breakdown of different roles of people that are at the conference today? Because if you look through that, there's all these different titles and names, and it's hard to know what each of those roles are and if they're similar to others. So among your teams or the teams that you've set up some of your students on, etc., what do you see as some of the more common subgroups of roles that are possible? You have like a programming team, you have a financial team, you have the business liaison, things like that.
Yeah, so I can speak to the roles that are on our team. So we're independent of IT, so a lot of the IT-specific roles live outside of our group. So we have 3 distinct roles on our team, and I say roles, there are some people that cover multiple roles. We have data scientists, and so their role is pretty distinct. We have business liaisons, so if you think of a traditional IT structure, they're kind of like PMs. They represent the business in our conversations, they manage our projects. I always say that the business liaisons represent the business and the data scientists represent the data, and my hope is that they will argue in a really productive way and then we'll come to the best conclusion. We have data analysts, and their role is to understand the business process and all the data elements that exist within that process so that then we can understand how they work together, do some descriptive analytics, and maybe our project ends there, and maybe it goes to data science. And that's kind of how our team is structured.
Jeff?
When I think about an analyst, right, there's this continuum, and in development there's something like a full stack developer, right? So it's like soup to nuts, they can do it all, right? And so like, if you think of a full stack analyst, it's someone who can start with just data out there in the ether, kind of curate that data into a model, right? Figure out how to get that into some sort of BI tool or visualization tool, find the story in that, and then put that story into a presentation and sell it, right? That's kind of the spectrum. So when you're starting out or when you're building a team, you have to kind of cover that spectrum and figure out where your gaps are, right? You need strong people in each of those. It's great to have someone who can do it end to end, but even generalists tend to specialize in something, right? They gravitate towards the technical side or the presentation side. So it just depends on the specific teams. I'm saying don't limit yourself to, right, if you're in analytics, you don't need to, you can fulfill a sliver of that and still be a hugely valuable person in an analytics space, right? You don't need to be full stack, but you may need to change the companies that you're looking for. Right, so at a smaller company, if you're the analytics person, then you better be full stack, right? But if you really like one part of that and you're really good and you just want to do that thing, you might need to look for a larger company, right, where you can be a member of the team with a complement of people who could kind of fill that stack.
Great. Where do you think you are on the spectrum, at least when you were starting?
I have always been on the data as a means to an end side, right? So I would prefer to get the data in somewhat of a clean state, analyze it, find the story, and convince others.
Great. So I guess next we'll go to the data science world has been transforming a lot. I think that this would be a great question for Dr. Edwards. How have you seen the roles that you're placing people in changing? And we can talk even more about that, like how do you see the bigger picture 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
We had a conversation last night about how people are using data, and that it seems that it might be a little slow. So we're talking about data, we've been talking about it for a long time, but when you see then how it's being utilized, that maybe that's a little bit slow. And what I'm seeing is that it takes a while then for the change. That we have a lot of the companies now that are using the tools, and now even we're hiring different people with different titles, and then having this expectation of being able to identify these answers in the data, but then it takes a while to get to the change. And I love to use education and pick on education because I'm in it as a great example, but I'll use this, it's such a great example because it's about student behavior. So one of the things we know for a fact now, because of the data and the analysis, is that if a student registers the first day of the semester for the first time they come in and they take a class, like only 2% of them will succeed. If they come to the community college, only 2%. It's been 1.5 years now since we've known that data point for us to now implement something. Because, boy, everybody was really nervous. They were really nervous about how it was going to impact enrollment and how it was going to impact revenue, and what if it meant that a faculty member wouldn't end up having a full class. So we've had that swirling now, and I think our tools and our understanding of the data has gotten so much more sophisticated, but I believe it still is going to take a while for us to get comfortable to implement things. And I don't even know that we will be, as a society, able to move super fast. I'm hopeful that we'll be a little more confident in the data that comes in. But I think that is one of the things that I'm seeing now. We are seeing more of a demand for individuals who have this background. But I would say it still isn't the only piece of the job. There is still an expectation that you will have that computer background, you will have the data background, and that you'll have some understanding of whatever the field is that you're going to be working in. You're not just going to come in to do this thing for the company, and I think that's true kind of across the board.
You guys have anything to add?
Yeah, I think my comment would be that data is so much a part of everything that we do that even if you're not in analytics, you are often still an analyst in our organization. And so I think that it's really interesting to think about all of the roles that exist and how much of that role really is analytics, even if it's not intended to be. So my argument would be, it used to probably be interesting to see the data, maybe that was a nice to have, and now in order to keep up, it's a necessity.
And Jen, anything about what you think about the current state of the data science world and anything about the future?
It kind of echoing with it. I think it's just going to keep going, right? It's like we're never going to be like, okay, we're done with data, right? Let's move on to the next thing, right? It's here to stay, and it's really exciting to see it showing up in things that you would just never expect to see it in, right? I remember even probably, I don't know, eight years ago now when that Habit came out. I don't know if you've read like The Power of Habit, and it was all about kind of this data driven, like being able to understand people's habits through watching what they buy at Target, right? And understanding, hey, if people buy these certain things at Target, then they're probably pregnant. So let's send them some coupons, right? And tell them congratulations. And then you have people like their families don't know they're pregnant. They're sending all the coupons, and right? Now you have a problem, right? Just these really interesting case studies, and just I think from a just a personal perspective, right? The way that you're just monitored, right? And it's just like you just accept that because I want my smartphone and I want to get directions, and as part of me getting that service, they get a bunch of data about me, right? And people are analyzing that data and they know a lot about me personally. So it's just, as a society, everything's shifting around data, and it's fascinating to watch.
Especially with that openness about data, have you noticed the change in security around data? Like, how have your teams transformed because of that? Have you been hiring more for those roles, data like cybersecurity, things like that?
Yes, so data security is critically important to our business model, and so that's always going to be top of mind, right, for Cover My Meds.
I read that is the largest gap in industry in the upcoming years is cybersecurity analysts or people that are able to help with that in industry. So that could be a great place for a career.
We're certainly seeing that with regards to what the industry is asking for, even at the community college. And compared to coming in and saying we want this person who has a degree in data, we are having them come in and say we need them to have some background, some understanding so that they can help us with the cyber, because that really is, it seems many companies right now are in a very reactive space because they're under attack. So just giving some fundamental skills that they could hire someone, that we could give them an extra certification that they could understand how to determine what kind of attack and how to keep that data protected because it's happening all the time.
And so Jen mentioned earlier in this panel that she had kind of a diverse background that contributed to her success in data analytics. Have you guys witnessed that across any of your experiences? Someone that was a physicist, for example, that Laura mentioned, that happened to do really well in data science because he was constantly questioning. Have you seen anything like that that fits well?
I am always surprised by the people who just self-select into this field. For me, like anyone who has, are there any liberal arts majors in here in English? So my master's is in literary criticism, which is the most analytical view of literature that you could ever get. Like it's ridiculously analytical, but I didn't have the self-knowledge to recognize that. Right? It just kind of came about where people were like, man, you're really analytical. I'm like, oh, okay, let's use that to my advantage, right? And so if you start thinking about the way that you think and the way that you see the world and the way that you apply yourself to certain problems, right? And you find that you have that need for data, you want to answer it, you want to get to the bottom of it, right? Then it doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're a data analyst, right? And start kind of using that to your advantage, because once you realize that about yourself, no matter what industry you're in, and start kind of harnessing that, right? Teeing up the data, asking the questions, finding the answers, getting those in front of leadership, right? They'll respond to you and you will find yourself in a data analytics role.
Yeah, I know that the opening speaker today had a background in forestry, so it's incredible what you can accomplish. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this as well, but the next question we have is what do you look for in potential candidates when making a hire? We talked about having that in-person experience of application of tools you've learned, but what else can you comment on when it's time for you to add someone to the team?
So I'm going to comment on the non-data science role since we talked about that a little bit already.
Okay.
I think for me, it's someone that will question everything, because that I think is the person that's really successful, and the person that can tell a story and sit down and communicate with someone that maybe doesn't understand the data, the person who will see a business process or be part of a conversation when they're talking about something and ask the right question and know when to dig in. And I think that is something, listening to what you just said, I mean, it's something that's kind of inherent in who you are, and it's certainly something that you can hone, but I'm always looking for that because I think it's so impressive, and I think it's what ultimately takes the really cool things that data scientists do and makes them actionable in our business.
You have to be brave, right? Be confident enough that, right, you found this, you're confident, and you need to be able to present that, right? And carry that off and answer the questions and just, right, put it out there. So you have to, more than just being analytical, you want something to happen with that, right? It's like, I'm right, and let's do this, right? And let me convince you.
Dr. Evans, what kind of coursework do you suggest that might help you build those skills, or maybe extracurricular activities that you have?
So I would say internship.
Yeah.
Getting, even just talking to people right now at a conference like this and finding out what people are doing and how they got into the positions that they're in. I'll tell you, I've been on a number of searches this year and at all levels at our college, and it has data in the job description. will use data to make decisions. So as we have all mentioned, it's in almost every job. So you can see how important it is. But I think even if you're in an extracurricular group, you can be using data, and you can then demonstrate how you use data to make decisions, whether it's a philanthropic organization or if it's just a student club. How are you making the decisions about what you're doing? Just this conference alone, there will be data that comes out of this conference. And so how is that going to be analyzed and how will it be used? So I think the skill is being able to document that process so that someone can feel that you're confident and can use that data. Because we haven't even identified all those data sets yet that we may be using. So for me, the other piece of it is that creativity, that hunger, that they've never used this to solve that problem. I think we've got the problem now, but what if we apply this to it, or take this data and apply that to see if we can get a different solution? That's one of the things I'm looking for. Not waiting for me to tell them, go do these 3 things, but them telling me, this is how I think I can solve that problem.
I would just echo that with find someone that you really respect and that you respect the things that they're doing, and talk to them. Get to know them, understand how they think about challenges, because I think watching someone else do these types of things helps you learn how to kind of harness the things that you're already thinking.
And one other thing that I found, a lot of my friends that aren't in these more data-heavy fields in their majors, they can participate in Kaggle competitions, Kaggle with a K if you want to look it up, things like that to show that they are strong analytical thinkers. Yeah. So we have a little bit more time. We have about 10 more minutes, so I'll ask one more question and then we can field questions from the audience. So what is your interview process usually like? I know that a younger student recently asked me about a sample of work. What kind of experiences have you either seen in your own career or for your personal company that you work for now that require that kind of process?
So I cover my meds. I didn't create the process. I kind of inherited it, and I love it. It's a pretty intensive interview process where first you'll get the applicant, and the HR recruiter will call them and talk to them, think that they might be good. Then we'll do maybe an hour and a half on-site interview where 1 or 2, maybe sometimes 3 people will talk to them if we think that they're a good fit. Then we schedule a project day. And so for the project day, they'll come in, they're given a project in the morning, one that it would be very unlikely that they would be able to complete that day. And they have to spend the day kind of working on that. They have lunch. We have kind of some touch bases where they can ask questions. And then we'll have lunch with the team. They'll have another hour or so to work. And then we have a readout with the team and all the stakeholders of, hey, what'd you find, right? And what didn't you find? And what are your next questions? And if you had another day to work on this, what would be the next things that you would do, right? And so it kind of puts some pressure on them, but it's like everyone kind of blossoms in that, right? And it's like, are you up for the challenge? And it's more so, it's great to see what people can accomplish, but it's also really great to see how they react to that pressure and how they kind of think about, okay, I didn't get this far, but here's my next steps, right? I already have this laid out, and here's the next things, and I saw this, and this is weird, and I can't explain it, but I would look into that, right? So one thing that I really love about it is like it's a big investment of our time to kind of bring them in and have this interview process, but it's also they feel the people that we hire, and I went through this and I felt very invested in as an employee, like they really want to find someone with this skill set, right? And I want the best person for this job, and not I can't make that decision in an hour, right? It's going to take me longer.
Great. What about your interview process?
I think it really just depends on the role. I think if we are looking for someone more technical or someone that has certain skills, we've kind of done lots of different things. It just depends on what the exact role is. I think talking to people that we know can ask some tough questions and make sure that we are assessing that person's aptitude. we are also really, really focused on culture fit at IGS. So we always say we have a lot of really great people, and we can train the person with the right aptitude that's the right culture fit to do a really good job. And so that is the biggest focus. I mean, certainly you need to be, prepared for that role, but I would say beyond that, that's the biggest focus for us.
Yeah, and I would just add, in the interview process for everyone who goes through it, it's so difficult because you're setting yourself up for rejection, right? But it is so important to be vulnerable. Sometimes when those questions are asked and you think that's just a throwaway question where they're just asking for your opinion, or they're asking really something that might hit you as that it's a profound question, go there, answer the question. And this isn't like not to make you cry, but you can really tell, any of you that have ever been in interviews, you can tell the person that is there, that is present, that is willing to really kind of expose themselves, even through, the basic question like, if you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be? Or something like that. There are just some questions where you can really see if that person is present, and through those types of questions, that's how I can tell if it's the culture fit.
Great. Okay, anything you'd like to add before we take the audience questions? Okay, who has any questions? I can repeat backgrounds if you're interested in a particular field or anything like that. Yeah.
Great. I actually have a question, I guess not as much as for people starting out, but you now as leaders. From the perspective of even growing further in your career, how much do you think for your position or where you want to go matters to have in-depth knowledge versus kind of have a general knowledge?
I think you definitely need a general knowledge, right? Because you're going to have just different things that you're responsible for that you don't do the work of that, right? But it's good to have a deep knowledge of something. So cool, right?
I would say the broader knowledge is more important, because I think it's really easy if you know something really, really well to climb out of that, and you have to in order to do the other things that you need to do to effectively run a team. And so, and to effectively lead people. I think that's a big one too. Something that we always talk about is, if you want to become a leader, that is not the same as being really good at what you're doing and then being promoted. And so a leader is a separate role. Is that something you're interested in? If so, what skills do you need to hone to get that role? And then as you continue to move up, how much more of your time is spent doing that? And then how do you develop the people that maybe are more technical or have those deeper skills than you do? How do you make sure that you continue to develop and motivate them so that they can be as good as you were before you got that role?
Yeah. Do you want to just talk loud?
Sure, I can talk.
Go ahead.
So you talked about a lot about like kind of new roles and some like career directions and opportunities. But so I think, and probably everyone else is realizing as well, that when we're developing and building and expanding these like data science and especially like analytics teams, that we probably are needing to bring on some new roles. So what kind of new roles do you think definitely need to be on these teams that either people in other analytics roles can move into, or that could be brought into from other roles that have not yet been included on the standard analytical team?
So one of the roles on my team that was piloted this summer and then is expanding rapidly is, we call them strategic data partners. So it's a client-facing analyst. So they're able to represent our data to the clients in the client meetings, answer their questions kind of on the fly. So they have to be not only a technical expert in our data and our data rights, right, and what we can share and what we can't share due to contracting in terms of service, but they also need to be able to portray that in a meeting confidently, right, inspire confidence and build a relationship not only with the clients around the table, but also perhaps with their data analytics teams, right, at their companies. So it's a it's a fascinating role to me because it really kind of fills in the picture. It's two completely separate skill sets that are meshed together. So that would be one that I think is an interesting new development.
What I'm seeing is that ability to translate the data, and you have the Tableau and the data visualization, but it's kind of more than that. So you might have that person who's really great with the data and getting that outcome, and they love their charts and they love their numbers, but then it's taking that and making the compelling story to get the action sooner than later. So I really see that being a role, and some of the people who are going into design, I think they can fit that very well, but they have to have an understanding of the data as well.
I would just piggyback off of what you said a little bit and say, before telling the story, also asking the question, because sometimes the question that you're asked is not really the question that you want to answer, if that makes sense. And so being able to reframe a question, make sure you maybe understand the data well enough to recognize that there could be other things that could be valuable as well. So it's the same translation concept, but on the front end as well as on the back end.
We are at the mark. Are there any final questions? Okay, great, thanks. Let's give it up for our panel.